billionaire who swore against love until she made him break every rule. Oliver Kensington was not the type to get swept up in emotion. He wasn't built for it. His world was structured, meticulous, and driven by results. As the CEO of Kensington Enterprises, one of the most successful conglomerates in the world, Oliver knew what it took to get to the top. Control, focus, and distance. People came and went in his life like pieces on a chessboard, each playing a role and then being discarded when they no longer served a purpose. But that was before his PR team stormed into his office like a whirlwind of whispers and agendas. "Oliver, we need to talk," said Kelly, his chief public relations officer, with a sense of urgency in her voice. She was impeccably dressed, her sharp blue eyes betraying the hint of concern that rarely showed on her face. Oliver barely looked up from his paperwork as he waved her in. "What is it now, Kelly? Another crisis to handle?" "This is serious," she continued, crossing her arms as she stood in front of his desk. "Your public image is starting to decline. The media is beginning to paint you as cold, unapproachable, even heartless. You've been portrayed as a man who values money more than people." Oliver didn't flinch. He had built his empire on being ruthless and calculated. What did the media matter? But Kelly's next words took him by surprise. "We have a solution, a simple one. We need you to appear more human." Oliver raised an eyebrow. "More human? And how do you suggest I do that?" "We want you to date someone, not just any woman, but someone real. Someone who isn't part of your usual high society circles. We'll build a public relationship, one where the world can see you caring for someone. They'll think you're capable of love, compassion. You'll win the hearts of the public." The suggestion hung in the air. For a moment, Oliver felt a flicker of discomfort. He wasn't the kind of man who did things for appearances, but then again, his brand was everything. A tarnished reputation could cost him everything he had worked for. A simple relationship, a fake one at that, seemed like a small price to pay. "You want me to pretend to date someone?" Oliver asked skeptically. "That's your big idea?" Kelly nodded. "Yes, and not just anyone. Someone genuine, a real woman who can balance out the picture of who you are, someone who isn't interested in your wealth, someone with integrity." "Do you have anyone in mind?" Oliver asked, already sensing that this wasn't going to be a simple task. "We've been looking into it. There's a woman, Emma Thompson. She's a schoolteacher from a small town. No connections to the media, no interest in the celebrity lifestyle. She's perfect for the role." Oliver leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he processed the information. A teacher, from a small town, what kind of woman could she be if she wasn't already seeking attention or ambition? "Bring her in," he said with a shrug. "Let's see what she's got." The first time Oliver met Emma Thompson, he wasn't impressed. She walked into the sleek, modern office building, her small figure standing out against the towering glass and steel that surrounded her. She was dressed modestly in a simple blouse and skirt, her brown hair pulled into a neat ponytail. No designer label clung to her clothing, no overdone makeup painted her face. She was exactly what Kelly had described, real, unpolished, and utterly ordinary. But there was something about her. Even before she opened her mouth, Oliver sensed a presence in the room, a quiet confidence that couldn't be faked. "Miss Thompson," Kelly greeted her warmly, gesturing toward Oliver. "This is Mr. Kensington." Emma looked at him, her gaze cool but polite. She extended a hand, which Oliver took with an almost clinical touch, studying her reaction closely. Her handshake was firm, but unremarkable, the kind one would expect from someone who wasn't trying to impress. "Thank you for meeting with me," Emma said, her voice soft but steady. "I understand the purpose of this meeting, and I'm here to discuss the terms." Oliver didn't speak at first. He wasn't sure what to make of her. She didn't look starstruck or intimidated by him. Most people were. She didn't gush about his success or try to get in his good graces. "What exactly are you expecting from me?" she asked after a long moment, cutting to the heart of the matter. Oliver leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "You'll be playing the role of my girlfriend for a few months. Public appearances, media events, dinners. It'll be entirely for show. The goal is to improve my image." "I see," Emma replied, her expression neutral. And what do you want from me in return? Oliver wasn't used to people asking that question. Most people would have jumped at the chance for the money, the fame, the opportunity. But Emma's response told him she wasn't that kind of person. Money, he said, letting the word linger, a substantial sum, more than enough to meet any financial goals you may have. This arrangement won't last long, but I'll ensure you're compensated well. She hesitated for a moment, as if weighing the offer carefully. Oliver had expected her to hesitate, to demand more, or maybe even to back out. But instead, she simply nodded. I'll agree to your terms, she said, but I want one thing. I don't want anyone thinking this is a real relationship. It's a business deal, and I'll treat it as such. Nothing more. Oliver was taken aback. For the first time in the conversation, Emma was asserting herself. She wasn't falling over herself to please him, or even acting grateful. She had a boundary, and that intrigued him. You have your terms, he said, his voice colder now, but you'll have to be convincing. This is about image. Emma didn't flinch. I understand. I won't play into any fantasies. He nodded, the smallest flicker of approval crossing his face. Good, we'll begin tomorrow. The first public event was scheduled just a few days after their meeting. A charity gala, one of Oliver's regular haunts. As they stood together on the red carpet, the flashes of cameras blinding them, Emma couldn't help but feel out of place. She had never been to an event like this before. The gowns, the jewelry, the constant buzz of gossip. It was all a world away from the small town where she taught kindergarten. Oliver, on the other hand, was in his element. His perfectly tailored suit fit him like a second skin, and the way he moved through the crowd made it clear he was used to being the center of attention. He smiled and nodded at the various dignitaries and reporters, his gaze occasionally flicking to Emma beside him. But he didn't show any emotion, just the cold, practiced smile that he had perfected over the years. Emma felt a chill run down her spine as they posed for photos. This was all a game, a carefully orchestrated charade. She was just a prop, a means to an end. She could already sense the media's hungry gaze, the way they dissected every move they made. Smile, Oliver whispered to her, his voice low and commanding. Emma's lips curved into a tight, forced smile, and for a moment their eyes locked. There was something behind his expression, something unreadable. But she quickly looked away, not wanting to dwell on it. This was just a job. She had to remind herself that it was just business. But as the night wore on, something unexpected happened. The first week of their new relationship passed in a blur of gala events, press interviews, and public appearances. Emma found herself standing next to Oliver in every photo, her arm draped over his, a smiling, perfect picture of the billionaire and his beautiful girlfriend. But behind the scenes, the reality of the arrangement was far less glamorous. At the office, Oliver rarely spoke to her beyond the necessary pleasantries, and the public events were filled with strategic smiles, meaningless small talk, and an ever-growing distance between them. She had expected the charade, but the cold, calculated manner in which Oliver approached the whole thing began to take its toll on her. Her nights were spent rehearsing lines and planning her next public appearance, not with excitement, but with dread. She had to keep the story straight to ensure no one saw through the facade. But then there were the moments that threw her off guard, the moments when Oliver wasn't quite the man she had expected. It would happen occasionally, like the time they were at a charity auction. Amidst the loud chatter of the crowd, Emma had noticed Oliver quietly slipping a significant donation into a box for a children's hospital. It wasn't something anyone would have noticed, but Emma did. There was no fanfare, no cameras focused on him. It was just a small, simple act of kindness. But was it real? Or was he simply trying to maintain his image? The public continued to eat up the romance between Oliver and Emma. They were the talk of the town, the rich, cold billionaire with the small-town beauty at his side. The media loved the contrast between them, pitting their worlds against each other as a kind of fairy tale. The photographs of their outings were carefully curated, their smiles perfect, their chemistry undeniable. But behind the glossy image, cracks were beginning to form. The more Emma was thrust into Oliver's world, the more she realized how hollow it all felt. His carefully constructed persona was just that, constructed. Everything about him seemed designed to maintain control. From the way he spoke to the way he moved through rooms. There was no room for real emotion, for genuine connection. The billionaire life was a maze of luxury and coldness, and Emma was simply a piece in his puzzle. One evening, after a particularly grueling media event, Oliver and Emma found themselves alone in a private room at one of his luxurious mansions. The party had ended, the guests had gone, and only the staff remained, cleaning up the remnants of champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. The two of them were standing by the large windows overlooking the city skyline. The moonlight reflected off the glass, casting long shadows across the room. Oliver, for once, wasn't wearing his usual air of detachment. He stood with his arms crossed, staring out at the city, lost in thought. Emma took the opportunity to speak her mind. "Do you ever get tired of all of this?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. He turned to her, eyebrow raised in mild surprise. "Tired of what?" "All of it." Emma gestured vaguely to the mansion, the glittering city outside. "The parties, the cameras, the constant pretending. Does it ever get exhausting?" Oliver didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her for a moment, as though he were weighing her words. "It's necessary," he finally said, his tone neutral. "This is the world I've built, Emma. It's not something I can just walk away from." "I didn't mean that," she said quickly. "I just meant, don't you ever wish for something real?" A silence fell between them, thick and heavy. Emma could feel the weight of his gaze, but she couldn't read him. Was he even capable of what she was asking for? "I'm not sure what you mean," he replied slowly, his voice almost unreadable. "I mean," Emma paused, choosing her words carefully, "a real relationship, a real connection, something that's not about image or status or business, something genuine." Oliver's expression hardened, the walls he had built around himself coming up again. "I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at. You knew what this arrangement was when you signed up for it." "I did," Emma replied, her voice firm but her heart racing, "but that doesn't mean it doesn't feel wrong sometimes." Oliver's jaw tightened slightly, and he turned away, looking back out at the city. "This is my life, Emma. This is what it takes to survive in my world." There was a heaviness in his voice that Emma hadn't heard before, and for the first time she wondered what he had given up to get to where he was. But the moment passed quickly. Oliver was back to his usual self, his emotions hidden behind layers of control. "Let's get some rest," he said abruptly, dismissing the conversation. Emma watched him leave the room, and for the first time she felt a pang of something like pity or perhaps curiosity. What had made him this way? And was there any hope of breaking through the walls he had built around his heart? The next few weeks were a blur of events, but something was changing, even if it was too subtle to notice at first. Oliver was different, not in any obvious way, but in the small things. He was less cold during their private moments, more willing to engage with her beyond their public image. There were moments when their conversation felt more like a real exchange, when she saw glimpses of a man who wasn't just a billionaire robot, but a human being, vulnerable and lost in his own way. One evening, after a particularly exhausting photo shoot, they were sitting in a quiet corner of a rooftop bar, a glass of wine in hand. The city stretched out before them, the lights twinkling below, but it was the silence between them that spoke the loudest. "I know this isn't real for you," Oliver said suddenly, breaking the quiet. Emma looked at him, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "The relationship," he clarified. "You're just doing this for the money." "I get that." Emma felt a pang of guilt, but she pushed it aside. "It's true," she said, keeping her voice steady, "but that doesn't mean I don't appreciate the time we've spent together." Oliver nodded slowly, taking a sip of his drink. "I never thought I'd hear that from you." "Why?" she asked. "Because I'm supposed to be the perfect girlfriend or whatever." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "Because I don't usually give people the chance to appreciate me, to see who I really am." Emma didn't know how to respond. Was this Oliver's way of admitting that he was lonely? That behind the facade, he craved something real, just like everyone else? Before she could think of an answer, Oliver's phone buzzed, breaking the moment. He glanced at the screen and immediately stood up, his usual businesslike demeanor returning. "We have to go," he said, his tone all business again. Emma watched him leave, a strange feeling stirring in her chest. Was this really the same man who had hired her to play a role? who had wanted nothing more than to preserve his image. The lines between what was real and what wasn't were starting to blur, and Emma wasn't sure if she was ready for what came next. The next few weeks brought even more challenges. Media attention was growing, and the pressure on Emma to maintain the illusion of a perfect relationship was overwhelming. Yet, even in the midst of all the chaos, the connection between her and Oliver was deepening. The more she got to know him, the more she realized there was more to him than just the cold businessman. There was a man who had buried his feelings so deep that he couldn't even recognize them anymore. But that was the problem. Oliver had built walls around himself, walls that Emma wasn't sure she could ever break down. She was beginning to care for him, but did he care for her, or was she simply a means to an end? At a high-profile dinner, surrounded by flashing cameras and important guests, Oliver's gaze lingered on her longer than usual. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of vulnerability that made her heart race. For the first time, Emma wondered if this charade had the potential to turn into something real. But could she trust it? Could she trust him? The days seemed to stretch longer as the media circus around Oliver and Emma intensified. The public's fascination with their relationship was growing into a frenzy. But for Emma, the reality of living a life in the public eye was starting to take its toll. Every step she took felt like it was being scrutinized. Every word she spoke was analyzed and dissected by reporters and fans alike. At first, she had done it for the money, for the chance to get out of the small town and build a better life. But now she found herself tangled in something far more complicated. She had known this arrangement was supposed to be temporary, but the more time she spent with Oliver, the more she began to care about him in a way she hadn't expected. There were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when she saw the man behind the billionaire mask. He wasn't just a cold, calculating business tycoon. Beneath the sharp exterior, there was a man who had built walls around his heart, walls that Emma wasn't sure anyone could break down. But those walls were also the reason Emma had to be careful. She wasn't sure if she was seeing Oliver for who he truly was, or if she was simply buying into the illusion of him that he had carefully crafted for years. One afternoon, after another round of press interviews, Emma found herself sitting in Oliver's penthouse suite, staring out at the city skyline. She had just finished a photo shoot for a high-end magazine, and her makeup still clung to her skin. Her eyes were tired, her smile forced, but in front of the cameras, she had been perfect. The perfect girlfriend, standing by Oliver's side, just as she had been told to do. Oliver walked into the room, his usual impassive expression on his face, but when he saw her sitting there, something changed. He stopped for a moment, his gaze lingering on her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice surprisingly soft. Emma looked up, startled by the genuine concern in his voice. She wasn't used to this side of him. The Oliver Kensington she knew was cold, calculated, always in control, but right now he seemed uncertain. "I'm fine," she replied, offering him a faint smile. "Just tired." "Yeah, I get that," Oliver said, walking over and sitting down beside her. "This whole thing, it's a lot." Emma nodded, unsure of how to respond. The whole thing had become overwhelming, but there was more to it than just the press and the constant media attention. The more time she spent with Oliver, the more she realized that they were both trapped in their own roles. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I never thought it would feel like this." Oliver turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Like what?" "Like I'm pretending," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like I'm playing a part, and I'm starting to lose track of what's real and what isn't." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Emma could feel the weight of her own words pressing down on her. She had known this was a fake relationship from the start, but it didn't make it any easier. She hadn't expected to feel this conflicted. "I know," Oliver finally said, his voice rough. "I feel the same way. But this is what it takes. You don't understand how much is at stake. My whole career, everything I've built. If this image falls apart, so does everything." Emma looked at him, her heart aching as she realized how much pressure he was under. She had known about his empire, his wealth, his drive, but she hadn't understood the cost. "I get it," she said quietly, her voice softening. "But I don't want to be a part of the game anymore. I don't want to keep pretending." Oliver looked at her with a mixture of frustration and something else. Something deeper, something that looked like pain. "It's not that simple, Emma. You think you can just walk away from all this?" She turned away from him, looking out at the city lights. I don't know. Maybe I can't. But I don't want to keep living in a lie. There was silence between them, a heavy, uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch on for far too long. The following days were filled with tension. Emma and Oliver rarely spoke unless absolutely necessary. When they were in public, they played their parts flawlessly, but the air between them was thick with unspoken words. Emma could feel the distance growing, like an invisible wall that was steadily rising between them. The cracks in their carefully constructed relationship were starting to show, and Emma wasn't sure how much longer they could pretend. Then came the day that changed everything. Oliver called her into his office, his tone sharp and businesslike, just as it had always been. The penthouse was quiet when she arrived, and Oliver was standing by his desk, looking out over the city. "Sit down," he said, his voice clipped. Emma did as instructed, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The tension between them had reached a breaking point, and she didn't know what to expect. "I've been thinking," Oliver began, his back still turned to her, "about the future of this arrangement." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" He turned to face her, his expression hard. "I can't keep doing this, Emma. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. I know you're struggling with this, and I am too." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She had known this day was coming, but hearing him say it out loud made it all feel so much more real. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Oliver hesitated for a moment, his eyes searching hers. "We end this. The contract, the relationship, everything." Emma's chest tightened. "Are you sure?" Oliver nodded. "I don't want to drag you down any longer. I don't want you to feel trapped in this fake world. You deserve more than that." The finality of his words hit Emma like a punch to the gut. She had known their relationship was never meant to be real, but the thought of it all ending, of walking away from this carefully constructed world, left her feeling emptier than she expected. "I understand," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Oliver walked over to her, his gaze softening for the first time in days. "I'm sorry, Emma. I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't know how else to handle this." Emma nodded, her emotions swirling. "It's okay, I think I've been pretending too, in a way, pretending that I could handle this life, pretending that I could be something I'm not. But maybe it's time to stop pretending." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the situation hung between them like an invisible shroud, suffocating everything around them. Finally, Oliver broke the silence. "So that's it then. You'll walk away, and I'll go back to my life." Emma stood up slowly, her heart heavy. "Yeah, that's it." As she turned to leave, she could feel Oliver's eyes on her, but she didn't look back. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and for the first time in a long while, Emma felt like she was walking out of a dream and into the unknown. Days passed in a blur. The media coverage of Oliver and Emma's breakup was intense, as expected. The press had a field day with the narrative of the rich billionaire and the small-town girl who had fallen out of love with him. But as the weeks wore on, the public's interest in the breakup began to fade, and Emma was left to pick up the pieces of her own life. She returned to her teaching job, to her quiet life, far from the flashing cameras and the whirlwind of luxury. The transition was jarring, but it was also a relief. She didn't miss the spotlight, nor did she miss the role she had played. She had learned a lot during her time with Oliver, but most importantly, she had learned about herself. She had learned that no amount of money or status could fill the void of real human connection. But as the days turned into weeks, Emma couldn't help but think about Oliver. She hadn't seen him since the day they ended things. She hadn't spoken to him, not even once. But there was a part of her that wondered, had he really meant it when he said he didn't want her in his life? Or was it just another mask he had put on? The days following her breakup with Oliver were peaceful in a way. Emma settled back into her quiet life, focusing on her work and rediscovering the small pleasures she had once taken for granted. She found comfort in the simple routine, teaching children, meeting friends for coffee, and attending the occasional local event. Her life, though far less glamorous, felt authentic. It was hers, with all its imperfections and joys. And yet, there was a hollow space inside her, a space that had once been filled by the whirlwind of media events, grand parties, and Oliver's presence. She had made peace with walking away from his world, but it didn't mean the memories faded quickly. The billionaire had been a part of her life for months, and now that he was gone, Emma couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if their relationship had been real, if their connection hadn't been built on a carefully constructed lie. The media continued to cover their split, but the frenzy slowly died down, replaced by fresh headlines. Emma became just another face in the crowd again, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her story with Oliver wasn't truly over. In the back of her mind, she couldn't help but ask, did he ever care? Was any of it real? 2 months had passed since the breakup. Emma had moved on, or at least she thought she had. She had made peace with the end of their brief, intense chapter. But then, one evening, as she was preparing dinner in her small apartment, there was a knock at the door. Surprised, she wiped her hands on a towel and opened it to reveal a familiar figure. Oliver. Her heart skipped a beat as she took in his appearance. He looked different. His usually sharp suit was replaced by a casual jacket and jeans, but the same intensity remained in his gaze. There was a weariness to him now, a softness that wasn't there before. It was as if the walls he had so carefully built had crumbled, and for the first time she was seeing him without any pretense. Oliver, she asked, unsure whether to feel relief or discomfort. She hadn't expected to see him again, let alone show up at her doorstep. I need to talk to you, he said, his voice hoarse. Can I come in? Emma hesitated. Part of her wanted to slam the door shut, to avoid reopening old wounds. But something in his eyes stopped her. She stepped aside and allowed him inside. They sat in her modest living room, the air thick with unspoken words. Emma had no idea what this visit meant. Had he come to apologize? To explain himself? I know you probably don't want to see me, Oliver began, his voice low. But I had to come here. I couldn't just let things end like that. Emma raised an eyebrow. End like what? You made it pretty clear that we were done. You walked away. I know, he admitted, his voice laced with regret. But I was wrong. I thought walking away would be the easiest thing for both of us. But it wasn't. It hasn't been easy for me. I miss you, Emma. Her breath caught in her throat. She had never expected him to say that, let alone admit it so plainly. She had never seen Oliver vulnerable before, and the raw honesty in his voice made her heart ache. I thought it was just part of the game, he continued, that I could play my part, be the businessman, the cold, calculated person everyone expects me to be. But I'm not that person, not with you. Emma felt her pulse quicken as she listened to his words. Why now? After everything, why come back to me? Because I've been lying to myself, he said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. I've been telling myself that I could walk away from you without any consequences, that I could go back to my life and forget you. But I can't. I can't forget the way you made me feel, the way I felt when I was with you. Emma's heart fluttered in her chest. Part of her wanted to reach out to him, to embrace him and let all the emotions flood back, but another part of her warned against it. He had hurt her just as she had hurt him. But the truth was, they both had been playing a part in their own way. I don't know what you want from me, Oliver, she said softly. I've moved on. I'm not the same person I was when we first met. I can't go back to being just a part of your world. Oliver reached for her hand, his touch gentle and warm. I'm not asking you to go back to that world. I'm asking for a chance to show you that I can be more than the person I was. More than the man I thought I had to be. She stared at him, unsure of what to say. Was this the same Oliver who had once used her for his own gain, or was this a different side of him? One that was finally being honest with himself. Why should I trust you? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. After everything we've been through, why should I believe that anything you're saying is real? Oliver's face softened with regret. Because I've realized something. I don't want a perfect image, Emma. I don't want to keep pretending. I want something real. Something with you. I don't know if that means we can pick up where we left off, or if we have to start over. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that I'm not just playing a role. Emma felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away, embarrassed. She had spent so much time wondering if this was all just a game to him. But now she wasn't so sure. The days after Oliver's visit were filled with uncertainty. Emma couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. Oliver had promised her that he had changed, that he wasn't the same man who had walked away from their relationship, but Emma couldn't shake the fear that it was all just another mask. She had to protect herself from getting hurt again, and that meant not giving in to the emotions swirling inside her. Yet, as the days passed, she began to see signs that Oliver was sincere. He wasn't the same man who had used her as a pawn in his public game. He was vulnerable, uncertain, and, for the first time, truly present. He reached out to her, not with grand gestures or publicity stunts, but in small, quiet ways that showed he was willing to put in the effort. He listened to her, respected her boundaries, and most importantly, allowed her the space to heal. Eventually, Emma agreed to meet him again. This time, there were no cameras, no press events, just the two of them in a quiet cafe, surrounded by the hum of normal life. It was there, in that peaceful setting, that they began to rebuild the foundation of their relationship. "I know I hurt you," Oliver said quietly, his gaze steady as he looked at her. "And I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Emma took a deep breath, her emotions swirling inside her. She had spent so much time resisting the idea of a relationship with him. But now she realized that maybe there was a chance. Maybe they could build something real, something beyond the image of the billionaire and the small-town girl. "I don't know if I can just forget everything that happened," she said softly, "but I want to try. I want to see if we can make this work, for real." Oliver reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "We'll take it one step at a time, no more games, just us." Months passed, and the world watched as Emma and Oliver navigated their new real relationship. They made headlines for the right reasons now. Not for a staged romance, but for the quiet sincerity they shared. The billionaire was no longer the cold, detached man the public had once known. Instead, he was a man who had learned the value of vulnerability, who had shed the image he had so carefully crafted to reveal the person beneath. And Emma, she had found herself again. She had rediscovered her confidence, her sense of self, and her ability to trust. Not just in Oliver, but in her own strength. In the end, they both discovered that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought or staged. They were real, and sometimes the most unexpected love stories were the ones that took the longest to unfold.